What's going on? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to build a floating shelf that will support a 19-inch CRT. Let's get started. We're going to start by cutting the largest right-angled triangle we can out of a 2-foot by 4-foot piece of 3/4 inch MDF. And the way you do that is you start in the middle of the 4-foot length and make two 45-degree marks and continue those marks all the way across the width of your piece and then make those cuts. Now this is a heavy TV, but the span on the shelf isn't that wide. But just to make sure we had plenty of stability, I went with 3/4 inch versus half. And once I had this rough shape, I took this inside the arcade and laid out the dimension of the TV and then where the Pac-Man and the Golden Tee arcade cabinets would be. Once I had those marks, I made better marks, straighter marks, and went ahead and cut those pieces out. So ultimately what I ended up with was a pretty familiar shape. And no, it's not an S. On my world it means hope. I hope this thing supports that damn TV. So moving inside, this is the most important part of this entire project. It's really important to build a good foundation for the shelf and then ultimately the TV. So what I did is I took a 2x4, ripped it down the center, cut it to length, and then I located the studs in the wall and sank 3.5 inch screws through the 2x4 and into those studs, making just a rock solid foundation and obviously leveling everything as I go. Before we go any farther, I want to do a test fit, not so much to see that the shelf was level, but also to make sure that it was tight against the wall. Sometimes the corners in your house aren't quite 90 degrees and you may have to do a little bit of trimming to get this to fit exactly the way you want. So the cool thing about a floating shelf is that you really don't see how it's fastened to the wall. It appears to be floating, it's kind of in the name. So to hide those 2x4 strips, I'm going to take some 1/2 inch MDF and rip those down, hit them with a round over bit, and then we're going to put this on the front of the shelf. The idea is to make the shelf appear to be much thicker than it actually is. So because of the shape of this shelf, I want to start with the center piece of trim. I'm going to go ahead and cut the ends at 45 degrees. And by making those 45-degree cuts, when you bring this to the front, your side pieces won't have to be angle cut, they can just be straight cut. But when you bring the two pieces together, you will see that you're going to have a little bit of extra material on that angled cut. Looks like it's about 1/4 inch. So let's go ahead and start with the straight cut side pieces. We're going to mark those, make sure that our length is correct. I want that to be a nice tight joint. And then I want to have a 1/2 inch offset, so the trim itself is going to be a 1/2 inch higher than the surface of the shelf, or the top of the shelf. So that's going to just give us a little bit of a lip to kind of hold anything, keep it from rolling off the top. It's not going to really hold the TV in place, that's not what it's designed to do. But your remote controls, any kind of DVDs or anything you may have up there will be partially hidden by that 1/2 inch lip. And it's just going to make it look a little bit nicer. And when you're working with MDF specifically, never rely just on the fastener. Remember to always use glue at every joint. So with those side pieces secure, now it's time to deal with that 1/4 inch of extra material we had on the centerpiece. So go ahead and hold that up in place. Give it a good mark, and then we're going to head over to the chop saw, set it at 45, and we're going to cut that mark, and this is the shape that you should end up with. Now don't worry too much if this fitment isn't perfect. We can definitely sand this down smooth. MDF is great for that. Once again, a lot of glue, especially on the pieces that actually butt together, not just on that 3/4 inch piece. A lot of nails, not just to the shelf, but where that joint comes together. If the heads of those brad nails don't sink all the way, don't worry, we're going to fix that in just a second. When you're sanding these corners, MDF will sand nice and smooth and uniform, but make sure you use a flat block to get a nice straight joint. I like to use a piece of 2x4 on the sandpaper. And if you want to countersink the heads of those brad nails, go ahead and use a flat punch and a hammer and just tap those in. So here's how it looks so far. I'm going to take a little bit of wood putty and fill in the small divots and holes, the imperfections on the front, sand that smooth, and then give this several coats of black paint. So to continue the illusion of the floating TV on the floating shelf, I wanted to hide the electrical also. Now I'm going to accomplish this by installing an outlet just above the shelf towards the back where all the cables and plugs from the TV and the DVD player can be hidden and tucked out of the way. And what I'm going to basically use is the void in the wall between the 2x4 studs, and we're just going to drop an extension cord down and drill another hole out of the wall next to an existing outlet, so we'll just be able to plug this in. So once we finished up the hole and made it just tight enough to accept the new outlet, we want to go ahead and feed the male end of our extension cord through the hole we just made, and then we're going to cut off the female end because this is going to be wired into the new outlet we install. Now the blue box I'm using here is referred to as an old work box. What happens is when you tighten up the screw on the front of this box, it sandwiches whatever you have the box installed on, whether it's paneling or drywall. Now what I'm doing here is checking the polarity on the wires because they're both the same color. I don't know which one is hot or L1 or which one is a neutral or L2. That's important to keep that polarity straight. So I'm just going to the male end and then checking the female end and just finding continuity. And with the wires installed on the outlet and the outlet installed in the box, it's time to finish it off with an outlet cover. And then the hard part of the project is actually done. Now with the paint all dry, the moment of truth. Will the shelf fit? How will it look? And well, it looks pretty good. Now I'm going to fasten this with 4 2-inch long screws towards the back of the shelf to really lock it down. It's always good to keep a clean work area, and it's always embarrassing to be confused by the Dyson vacuum cleaner. But don't let that stop you. Go ahead and clean up your mess before we finish this project up. Okay, instead of just plugging this into the outlet and calling it done, I'm going to go ahead and dress up the existing hole that was actually there when we had cable in the basement. So this is an existing hole that I'm just sort of taking advantage of. I'm going to check the fitment here, and I'm going to use what's referred to as like a blank for a receptacle. If you remove a receptacle, you put this in its place to kind of cover the hole in the wall. I took that and I cut a little notch to have room for the extension cord to fit through it, secured that to the wall, and then the last thing I installed was another receptacle cover, and it really just finishes this off and makes it look like it was supposed to be there the whole time instead of just an ugly hole where cable once was. When you do things like this, it really makes a big difference in the overall look of it. To keep these wires hidden is not necessary, but for me and my crippling OCD, it was just what the doctor ordered. So let's plug it in, and well, the moment of truth is coming up next. Is this TV gonna fall off the floating shelf? Was this all in vain? I'll start by plugging it in. Pick up the 19-inch Samsung, put it in place, and the shelf, it doesn't even budge. And while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and install the DVD player, just using AV cables. No HDMI here. It's like it's 1994 all over again. And with everything installed and the wires kind of tucked out of the way, this is the finished product. So I definitely want to have a 90s vibe in my arcade, and I don't just want to put some DVDs in there and have a movie going while I'm gaming. I actually have some old VHS tapes that have MTV footage, including, you know, the commercials and the actual videos themselves of some of the VJs. So I converted those over to an MPEG-2 file, which is what was required by my LG DVD player that I bought at Walmart for $38. Loaded those up on a 32 gigabyte flash drive, plugged that into the front of the DVD player and gave it a shot. This is going to allow me to, run several hours of footage without having to load discs or hit repeat on the same DVD. And it's definitely a unique thing to have playing as you're gaming. It really kind of takes me back to the 90s when you have, Alternative Nation and the Cranberries playing in the background. But you can do this with any kind of old footage that you have, and going with that MPEG-2 file format, it really just retains all the flaws and the problems and the scan lines and the V-hold issues with VHS tapes. It really just makes this thing feel like I'm back in the 90s, which is kind of the point. The finish on the front of the shelf isn't quite as slick and as smooth as I wanted it to be, but it does its job. It hides all the support underneath, so it really gives the illusion that this thing is floating. Hiding the wires was also a good choice. Definitely worth the effort. Alright, that does it for this one. I know it was kind of a simple project, but I thought it was kind of fun, and it goes to show you that if you put just a little bit of extra effort into even the most simple of projects, they can turn out probably much better than you expected. Anyway, thank you so much for stopping by. Y'all have a blessed day, and I will see you next time.